Hello everybody. I'm Henry Neufeld from Energeon Publications, and I'm talking today with Dr. Terrell Carter. We're going to give you the short bio, which is that he's a pastor, a professor, an executive director, which presumably keeps him busy, and he's also an author. And we're talking with him today about his new book in our Topical Line Drive series. So it's short and to the point and new. It's called I Have to Live with Them. Um, Other than the fact that I asked you, why did you write this book?
Because these are the kinds of questions that people engage with me about on a regular basis. Obviously, I am Black, I am African American, but the context that I usually get called to serve in are white contexts. I am the pastor of a historically white church and have been for about 8 years, and it's been a wonderful experience. And typically in my life, I'm usually the first Black person to do something that replaces a white person. I'm executive director of a community development corporation in St. Louis, Missouri, and long-term executive director before me was a white male. And this is something that I'm engaged in that people ask me about on a regular basis, but it's also something that I believe I can help bring not insight, but um, a level of understanding and graciousness that is not always broad in these kind of conversations.
Okay, so as a pastor of a predominantly white church, um, how do you see the possibilities for, how should I say, greater communication, greater community? And I really want to say simply being more the body of Christ with both African American and white churches and multi-ethnic churches around the country. What are the possibilities that we have here?
I mean, the possibilities are wide open if people are willing to engage in the conversation, to have hard conversations, and to also not take things so personal. I have to pause and say that the congregation that I serve has been a wonderful, loving congregation. And they didn't call me because I was Black. Me being Black didn't stop them from calling me as well. What they wanted to do was call the person that they believe best spoke to them or that God most clearly spoke to them through. And they thought that was me. And it didn't have anything to do with race. Um, I mean, that's a blessing. And this relationship has been a wonderful relationship. But more to the point of your question is, in order to have these kind of conversations, we number one can't be on the defense, which is a really hard thing to do because when you start talking about ideas or questions of race, people immediately want to defend themselves, which is understandable. But I never owned a slave, or I didn't, or those things, or I worked as hard as anybody else and I was never given anything. But the data shows, and anecdotally and so many other points of clarifying information shows that certain people groups have had advantages that have allowed them to make great headway over other people groups, and those benefits have helped certain people, and those lack of benefits have hurt certain people, and so that's a reality. Um, but again, the point is not being defensive and necessarily thinking that people are accusing you of something. It's more of here goes what the system has been like, and how has the system either benefited or not benefited someone else throughout time. And understand again that you are not necessarily being accused of anything, but also being able and being aware of how the system has either benefited you or your family members and has not done the same thing for someone else.
Perhaps as Christians, we could apply the word grace to that, giving one another grace for the conversations.
Woo! Woo! There's a lot of
uh,
grace that has to be done, has to be given, and a lot of grace that has to be accepted as well, though. So it's not just
yes.
ever a one-sided kind of conversation. Even as I talk about other people not being angry, as a Black person or as a woman or as a whatever the minority group is, it's also not an opportunity for me to attack someone else either and to pour out all my life grievances against them either. The question I always ask myself and other people is what kind of conversation are we having? Why are we having it? And then how does this conversation help not just us, but help the testimony of the God that we say we believe in.
Listening is always important in having good conversations. I was wondering if you could suggest questions, perhaps, that people should be asking in having these conversations, should be asking of one another.
I think that it's always important to get clarity at the very beginning. Um, what are we really talking about, or what is this conversation really about? Like, again, is this just a conversation where you feel like you want to vent, or is this a conversation where you really do want to try to understand my point of view, my life experiences, those kind of things, and are you willing to then listen to me and my point of view and my life experiences? And then how do we either try to meet in the middle, or how do we then intentionally decide not to try to hurt each other if we can't meet in the middle? And that may sound trite to some people, or it may sound kind of, sophomoric, and that may not be the right word. But, there's enough vitriol, there's enough anger and division in the world as it is. We shouldn't have that going on in the body of Christ, and the place that we say is built upon God's love for all creation. We have the opportunity, excuse me, to try to exemplify what love looks like in action and through relationship.
When you talk about it sounding simple or whatever, I'm reminded of uh, the comment about war that says in war everything is simple, but it's very hard to do.
Yeah.
And that actually, that actually, it sounds like what you're saying. You're talking about simple principles, but they're somewhat harder to apply. Uh, Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, again, it gets back to the idea of why are we doing this or having this conversation in the first place? Am I really trying to understand you? And I can't change the world by myself, but I can change my relationship with my neighbor, which hopefully then changes my relationship with somebody else. Or I can change my relationship with someone at work, which then helps change my relationship with someone else, which then hopefully changes, which then hopefully, and the ball keeps rolling. It starts out really simple, or it can start out really simple of, let me build one relationship, let me heal one relationship or strengthen one relationship, and then try to do it again with someone else. And hopefully, prayerfully, the idea is that that kind of spider web is growing, and a neighborhood, a community, a congregation, or whatever it is gets changed as part of that process.
Okay, we're talking about individuals here, and that's a very good thing. But as the body of Christ, let's talk just a minute about congregations or fellowships that are part of the body of Christ. How can we improve the conversation there between the different, the whole variety of congregations?
It's an interesting question, and I get asked that on a regular basis because I will speak before, historically white congregations, and they ask the question like there's one thing that they can do. Like, what is this one magic bullet, this one magic pill, this one magic, potion that we can, and we fix everything? And it's not going to be just one thing. It's this, again, the things that are happening on a personal level, you can raise that to a congregational level. First, the congregation or group or whatever it is has to acknowledge that something is going on, and it's not just people complaining. It's not just people being un-American or being unhappy. No, there's a reality that people face that certain other people have not faced and will not face in general. And if you can't do that, then the conversation is probably not going to happen in the first place. So acknowledge that something is going on, and then invite people who are willing to engage in that kind of conversation. And that's not me saying like you need to go out and get a consultant. I'm not saying that at all. But we're gonna make it so, again, simply black and white, black and white. You're white, I'm black. And if there's a black and white congregation, or a black congregation and a white congregation in a particular city, how do you reach out to each other? And I'm not saying that it always has to be the white congregation doing that, but um, typically, when black congregations reach out to white congregations, the assumption is that everything has to happen on the white congregation's time in their facility, the way they want things to be done, versus if a white congregation goes to a black congregation and says, hey, we want to come and learn about you and learn about what relationship could be like with you and help us understand that. So acknowledge that something has gone wrong, is not necessarily working the way that God intended. And number two, get out of your comfort zone and be willing to just at least reach out to another group congregation and say, we want to engage in conversation. What could that look like? And would you be willing to be committed to, for the next 3 months, to have an hour-long conversation and we talk to and with each other and not at each other? And maybe the first meeting, we are sitting, just listening, taking it all in, and then we leave and process it and then come back another time. Or you could set a goal that says once a month for the next 3 months, we want to fellowship together. And it's probably going to be uncomfortable at certain points. Maybe it's uncomfortable because of music, maybe because it's uncomfortable because of what time you fellowship, maybe it's uncomfortable because of whatever thing. But recognize that a certain level of discomfort will be there, and not allow that to stop the relationship from being built. Those are just a few of the simplest immediate things that people can do, or congregations, groups can do.
Okay, that sounds like an excellent start. Would you like to, kind of close? What would your hopes, maybe small step hopes, be for this particular book? Other than, of course, as an author, you want it to sell, but
well, it's a very small book. It's a short book, and it can be read, within an hour, a couple of hours. And the goal of the book was to try to introduce, again, white people to some of the concerns that Black Christians have, and the fact that these are ongoing concerns, and the concerns that we have in general revolve around, I'm going to use some big words, revolve around power and authority and who's right. And how do we recognize that there is more than one way to do what we do, whether it's worship, to serve, to engage in theology, that salvation is, about more than just what one group says salvation is. And what I mean by that is, as Christians, we believe in the gospel, but the gospel has been politicized, and it has been politicized by very particular groups for whatever reasons. And if you don't believe everything the way that group says you should, then you are not a true Christian. Well, that is not right, plain and simple. So how do we have conversations about what all of that means? And just because someone, or because another ethnicity, says there's more to this whole story, we believe that there's more to this whole story of relationship with God than what this particular denomination or this particular people group says it is. That doesn't make them heretical. That means that they are actively seeking to understand what relationship with God can and does look like, and how can other people engage in that conversation with them faithfully.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to remind everybody the book is I Have to Live with Them. It's in our Topical Line Drives series. And as you've just been reminded, it's a short read. It's a good way to get started. It has references in the back to let you know where you might go for further information. And I hope that you'll be willing to take the time to read this with an open mind, and listen and put something into practice. Thank you, Dr. Carter.
Thank you for having me.